thank you all for attending this presentation on managing and strengthening your CE program. We have a lot to go over, so let's get started. On the agenda today, we're going to be discussing BBS requirements such as the scope of practice and the documents that you're required to keep for at least 4 years. Next, we'll also discuss CAMFT's best practices, and in that we'll discuss the evaluation and promotional material. Then on to the renewal application, previous recommendations, administrative review process, documents required, citations, clinical and/or L&E, and activity summary. We're going to briefly touch upon writing measurable learning objectives, things we've seen come up, the review process and what it looks like on our end, and the resources that are available to you. So let's get started. Today, this session will teach CEPA providers what is needed to manage and plan your CE programs to ensure that BBS regulations and CAMFT's best practice guidelines are met. This workshop will also address your issues and provide advice, tools, and resources to keep you in compliance and strengthen your CE program. By the end of the course, you'll be able to identify 4 ways a course is eligible. You'll be able to list 6 documents that you must keep for at least 4 years. And finally, you'll be able to name 5 documents needed to submit with your renewal application. So first, let's talk about the scope of practice. I'll go ahead and read these. These are acceptable, fundamental to the understanding or practice of marriage and family therapy. Number 2, significant recent developments have occurred, enhance the understanding of the practice, and relates to the diagnosis, assessment, and treatment of the client population being served. So it has to circle back to the client. And finally, related to ethical, legal, statutory, or regulatory policies, guidelines, and standards. So now let's go through what's not acceptable. For example, the course title would suggest or focus not on consumer protection, legal, ethical, or clinical practice. The course is geared solely towards the therapist's self-care. It could pertain solely to the therapist's finances, or the course relates solely to the marketing of the therapist's practice. And finally, the course focuses exclusively on how to build a private practice. So we all know these courses are extremely valuable to the therapist attendee. However, these courses do not meet the guidelines for the BBS. So now what I'd like to do is go through an example of what's not acceptable. So here's a title, and I'll go ahead and read it. How to avoid burnout and take care of yourself. When I look at this title, it does raise some suspicions if it is even eligible for continuing education credit. I'd like you to take a few moments to read the description, and then we'll discuss the rest. Okay, so as you can see, this talks about the therapist's self-care and would it meet, as it's currently written, it wouldn't meet the BBS guidelines. But next, let me show you what we're going to do. We're going to be bringing it back to the client. So the title now reads, How to Help Your Client Avoid Burnout and Take Care of Yourself. So see that little twist there? Workshop description. How do we help our caretaker clients avoid burnout while working in the trenches? This interactive session discusses ways to keep our clients and ourselves feeling safe and supported and inspire a lasting sense of well-being. This interactive course will show you how to do and teach deep breath exercises to reduce stress, yoga techniques to relieve tension, how to do an image board to reframe thought patterns, and how to use Hindu chants to help your clients and yourself maintain healthy and happy relationships with themselves and loved ones. So as you can see, now that the course is revised, it has placed the main focus on the client, but also includes tools for the therapist who can take care of, who will be able to take care of themselves too. And we all know that that's so vitally important. For more details, we do have a CAMFT course content guidelines on our CEPA resources page. I'll be referring to the CEPA resources page several times tonight, so don't worry. Let's review what records the BBS requires to keep for at least 4 years. The following must be kept. So syllabus, the syllabi for all courses, the time and location of courses, the course advertisements, whether it's a flyer, website, emails, the instructor's vitae or resumes, the attendance rosters with the names and license numbers of the licensees who attended the courses, the sign-in sheets or any record of attendance, and finally, the confirmation of attendance, such as the certificate of course completion. Next, we've had many questions regarding giving CE courses online, especially in the age of COVID. So just so you know, any planned face-to-face educational course can be offered online and still be eligible for CEs via WebEx, Zoom, GoToMeeting, Skype, etc. Any of those online platforms, whichever ones you use. As for the sign-in sheet and sign-out sheets at live events, the BBS has actually indicated to us, to CAMFT, that either form of a sign-in sheet, paper or electronic, is permissible. The law requires providers to keep records of attendance. However, it does not specify how to keep those records. So this allows our CAMFT providers some flexibility. So, for example, an electronic report from Zoom is totally acceptable for a record of attendance. I do want to point out though, if you're doing courses where it's more self-paced and your attendees don't have the ability to interact with the instructor, a post-test is required with a 70% passing score. So those were the BBS requirements, and now I'd kind of like to shift gears and talk about the CAMFT's best practices. One of the areas you will see is in the evaluation. So the BBS does require an evaluation mechanism that should allow each participant to evaluate the continuing education course, and that mechanism must allow participants to assess their achievement in accordance with each individual learning objective. That's key. I won't go through this list specifically. However, I do want to focus on the last 3 here that are italicized at the bottom. Accessibility for technology support was adequate. For example, questions or problems were addressed effectively and in a timely manner. Technology contributed to learning, and course technology was user-friendly. So those 3 at the bottom are for distance learning courses. Many of our providers, whether they do face-to-face or online, they usually include these in all their evaluations, but it's up to you. You don't have to recreate the wheel and do another evaluation. Just so you know, it's up to you. But if you do the distance learning, those, in addition to the top CAMFT's best practice items, you should give your participants the ability to answer those 3 questions at the bottom as well. So as you can see, this is a sample of our course evaluation that we do encourage you to use. This will not only be on our CEPA resources page, but it will also be included in every one of our applications, whether it's an initial application, first year renewal application, or third year. So one thing that I do want to point out was what was discussed on the previous slide, which is the BBS requirement. So up here is the educational goals and learning objectives, and that is what the BBS requires. All of these other questions are strongly encouraged by CAMFT. And again, feel free to use this evaluation rather, and just fill in your information at the top. I do want to point out though, and remind you that the learning objectives should be identical to what's on your course syllabus, as well as your promotional material. So speaking of promotional material, we're going to discuss the CAMFT's best practices. But first, let's go ahead and review what the required items from the BBS here. So what we've done is bolded the items that the BBS requires to be on any of your marketing material, whether it be your website, the flyer, an email, the provider name and approval number, a clear, concise description of the course content and learning objectives. And again, a reminder, those should be identical to the ones you have listed in your syllabus. The provider policy on refunds in cases of non-attendance by the registrant. And finally, BBS requires a statement to be on all your promotional material. And I'll go ahead and read the statement. Course meets the qualifications for X amount of hours of continuing education credit for LMFTs, LCSWs, LPCCs, and or LEPs as required by the California Board of Behavioral Science. Now, please notice that the one in blue at the bottom, that's a statement that is required by CAMFT for our providers. We do require that statement. Keep in mind that both these statements must be quoted exactly as they were listed, with the exception of course, inserting your provider name and that type of information. Just make sure that they are quoted exactly. The rest of the items, again, are CAMFT's best practices. Most of our providers include all of those. And when you do this, it just gives your attendees a better idea of, it just gives them more information, and it really will strengthen your promotional material if you include these. I'm going to go ahead. And like the evaluation, this is a sample of our promotional material that's also included on our CEPA web resource page, as well as it's included in all of the renewal applications. So for convenience, I just wanted you to take a look at this so you can see where it has all of CAMFT's best practices. Everything we saw on the previous page is listed on this sample, and please feel free to use it. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the renewal application. Specifically, question number 1 that talks about previous recommendations. So in this specific question, it reads, if your first year renewal or last 3-year renewal application was approved with recommendations, please explain how those changes were implemented in your program. When you receive your renewal notice, if your last application was by chance approved with recommendations, the letter will be attached to your email notice that we send out. In the letter, it reads on the second paragraph, the following suggestions are provided to enhance the quality of your continuing education program and to remain in compliance with the CEPA guidelines for provider approval. You're not required to submit any documentation to demonstrate compliance at this time. However, these recommendations are to be implemented now and proof submitted during your first year or 3-year renewal process. So example, how to answer that. You would say, or could say, this is just an example, our last application was approved with the following recommendation. Here, the following required statement was missing from your promotional material and must be added. So here, this is the BBS statement that is required to be listed on your promotional material. So this particular provider or example did not do that. So finally, they stated, we immediately added that to our statement. We immediately added that statement to our promotional material as shown in our submitted documents. So, for example, if you don't address how you implemented a recommendation, or by chance you said you have implemented a recommendation, but your submitted documents don't reflect that, there's a really great possibility that your application could be deferred. It's not the worst thing in the world. However, it is something that could possibly and potentially cause a lapse in your provider status. So that's not something you want. So if you are not sure, or by chance there was no letter attached to your notice, please let us know, and you can email CEPA@camft.org, and we will certainly get that right over to you. So in keeping in line with the renewal application, question number 2 talks about the administrative review process. So the question reads, please explain the administrative review process you use with the evaluation results to improve or to plan for future professional development courses. What the committee is looking for here is an actual explanation of your administrative review process. So when you collect the data, all the evaluation results, what is the method you use to summarize the results and analyze the course? What happens next? Do you have a threshold for the questions that fall below a certain percentage or number? What do you do? Who decides? What the committee doesn't like to see is the answer, how pleased attendees are with your course. So the CAMFT CEPA department, meaning myself and Tim, we know that CAMFT has the best approved providers. We know that. So that's not a problem. We already know that your attendees love your course. But just to give you a little bit of a tidbit, that the committee doesn't like to see that answer because that's not what they're looking for. Okay. 1 second here. All right, moving right along. The renewal application question number 4 that speaks of citations. So here, the committee requires citations and references that support your knowledge base. The CE courses must include at least 3 to 5 citations or references. If you have a longer course or things of that nature, if it's appropriate, add more. The more amount of hours, add more citations and references to back up your content. The BBS regulations also require that the information and programs presented are based on methodological, theoretical, research, or practice knowledge base. And you can see the four items here. I won't go through each one. Some of the citations should be recent within the last 5 years. Now, you could potentially be using citations for a long-standing theory, and that's absolutely fine. But as you may recall, one question on the evaluation was this information current and accurate? So you just want to keep that in mind. And just a reminder that the citations should be listed in APA format. So renewal question or renewal application question number 5. This question asks, indicate which of the following requirements the sample course content meets. So here, your content could demonstrates the credibility through the involvement of the broader mental health practices, education, or science communities in studying or applying the findings, procedures, practices, theoretical concepts, or it could be related to ethical, legal, statutory, or regulatory policies, guidelines, and standards that impact each respective practice. It could also be both. You can check both those boxes. But just know that many times this information can be transferred from your course syllabus or under your description. But it has to describe your methodological, theoretical, research, practice, knowledge base, or legal and ethical standards. You just want to make sure that it's not vague where it just says our course discusses trauma. You do want to be a little bit more in depth on that. So you can definitely point that out. Also, please note that for a course to be eligible for LNEs, because I know as LMFTs and other license types, well, I actually don't know about other license types, but I do know for LMFTs, per licensing renewal, 6 CEs are for law and ethics. You have to do that. So in order for the content to be eligible for LNE credit, the content must include both law, which of course is statutes and regulations, and ethics, code of conduct, things of that nature, not one or the other. They have to be combined, law and ethics. Next, let's discuss the activity summary. Please provide information on the activity summary for your highest attended course within the last renewal period. Now, if you're submitting your highest attended course for review, then go ahead and provide information on the activity summary for your next highest attended course. Technically, this next part, I just want to remind you, if you include any learning objectives in your summary, make sure that they are measurable, especially if that was in your approval with recommendations letter. Our CEPA committee is sharp, and they will catch that. So you definitely want to make sure that if you include your learning objectives, that they're measurable. And technically speaking, you don't have to include the learning objectives, but in the event you do, just make sure they're measurable. And finally, let's discuss the documents that are required. When you're submitting your renewal applications, we would like just one course. And we're fully aware if you, a lot of our providers provide conferences. And we wouldn't need the whole entire conference submitted. What we would request is that you pick one session from that conference and submit those documents. And I'll go ahead and talk about the documents that are needed. The course syllabus, which at minimum must include the general outline of the course with the main points for each topic, educational goals, and specific learning objectives that are measurable. Instructor vitae or resume, not just a bio, it has to be the full resume. The program evaluation form, and it must be a blank copy. Please don't submit completed evaluation forms. The certificate of course completion, and finally, the promotional material and or announcements, including the email, because we know a lot of people offer courses in-house, and they don't have per se a website or promotional flyers. So an email is just fine, as long as it demonstrates compliance with all the requirements. I will just quickly point over what the BBS requires in a course syllabus. The rest would be CAMFT's best practices. So on the bottom here, we have the outline with main points for each topic, the educational goals, and measurable learning objectives. So speaking of measurable learning objectives, we're going to discuss on how to write them. We'll briefly touch base on this. And I forgot to mention, of course, the course syllabus is located on our resource page and also located in all of the applications. So it's readily available for you. So writing measurable learning objectives. Learning objectives indicate specific learning outcomes that are derived from the educational goals, which should indicate broad learning outcomes. Measurable learning objectives are very specific things that participants will be able to do right then and there at the end of the course. So when you ask your participants if the learning objective was met at the end of the course, they should, without a doubt, be able to say yes. That is your goal as a provider. So writing measurable learning objectives. If you've had difficulty in this area, I can empathize, because when I started in the CEPA department, it was really hard for me to wrap my head around. So I found that a good trick is to make sure that your learning objective has a number in it. This kind of forces it to be measurable. With speaking with my former committee members and, just in my time in the CEPA department, I've tried to create samples and examples that kind of helped it click for me. So I hope that it clicks for you as well, if you have any issues with this. One of the examples would be participants will be able to identify at least 4 types of child abuse. Participants would be able to name 5 effects of child abuse, and participants will be able to identify 3 strategies to aid recovery. So you can see putting a number in there, it kind of forces it to be nice and measurable, kind of like the learning objectives at the beginning. However, we all know that a number is not everything. So here's an example of an acceptable learning objective without a number. Participants will be able to explain the difference between child abuse and child endangerment. And finally, participants will be able to define child abuse. So as you can see, those don't have a number in them, but they're measurable. So just to give you an example of the ones with a number and without. So let's talk about the verbs while writing measurable learning objectives. And we've tried to highlight the blue ones are the ones that are the most common. There's other ones that are above, carry out, prepare, operate, plan, repair. Those are also, for example, those are perfect verbs. It's just ones highlighted in blue are the most common. Let's discuss or focus more on the ones not to use. I won't go through the whole list, but for example, discuss, words like understand, articulate, and feel, recall, or recognize. Those are more subjective and extremely, extremely difficult when you're using those verbs to make them measurable. Those verbs can also be used in like the educational goals, so to speak. We also have how to write measurable learning objectives available on our CEPA resources page as well. Some of the things that we've seen come up probably within the last year, the certificate of course completion requires 7 items. And I'll go through the list and then go into a little bit more detail of the items that we've seen come up. First and foremost, the name and the name of the licensee, as well as their license number or any other identification number. The reason that is bold is we've kind of seen in applications as well as renewals that the license number is omitted. It works best if you perhaps have the space for the name and the space for the license. That way the attendee can fill it in, or however it works, whatever's convenient for you. Those 2 items have to be that on the certificate. Next, the course title, the provider name and address, board recognized approval agency name, which would be CAMFT. And of course, some of our providers are probably approved by other agencies, so you would need to add them as well. The number of hours of the continuing education credit that they will receive, the date of the course, and the signature of the course instructor, provider, or provider designee. This should be an actual signature. It can be a copy of your signature, but it should be your actual signature. The following 2 items that we've seen come up, they actually do not need to be on the certificate. It's nice to include them. It's a great addition. But if you include the BBS statement that we spoke of before, or the CAMFT statement, both are listed on the promotional material, make sure that they're quoted exactly as listed. Because again, our committee is sharp and they will catch that. But just so you know, you don't have to have them on there. So you can omit that. You don't even have to have them. Again, it's okay if non-licensees get a certificate. You do not need to create a separate one. So that's good, because that has come up where some providers have created different certificates, and you are absolutely able to do that. But if you don't have to, why create more work for yourself? So the review process, kind of want to give you an idea of how it goes on our end when we receive an application, and when you'll receive your notice. So you will receive an email 90 days prior to your expiration date. I know that's kind of seems like a long amount of time, but there's a good reason, and I'll go into that. We ask you to submit your application and pay within 30 days to give the committee 60 days that they are allotted to review. When you see your notice, do not rely on the latest date as your deadline, because that is your expiration date. So in the notice that I'm sure you've all received from me, maybe once or twice, the first paragraph reads, "This is a friendly reminder that it's time to submit your 3rd-year renewal application for your CAMFT CE provider approval. Your provider number will be expiring," this is just an example here, 1/1/2022. In order to give the CEPA committee enough time to review your submission, you will need to submit your annual fee and renewal application by 11/1/2021. So we review, myself and Tim, we review your application first, and we go through each and every application in its entirety, and there may be revisions needed. So if you get the revision email, the sooner the better to get those revisions in will really help you, okay? Even if you're asked, this has also come up. So even if you're asked to revise a course that's already been given, think just think of those sample documents in your application as brand new documents. And also, if you are not approved on or before your expiration date, then you'll not be able to offer CEs until you're reapproved. So really, again, don't go by your expiration date. If you send in your application on 1/1/2022, the committee, as per the CEPA manual, they do have up to 60 days to review that application. It doesn't usually take our committee that long, but they do have that amount of time. So essentially, if you were to send in your application and fee on the date you expired, you would not be able to do CEs or offer CEs until 60 days later. So that's really, it would behoove you to get it in as soon as possible. That way we can review it for you. So the change of program administrator. When that happens, because we know that people transition into new roles, perhaps they retire or leave the organization altogether, please let us know if that change occurs within 15 days. It needs to be in writing. And by writing, I mean even via email with their contact information so we can update the record. When we send emails and we don't have the notice of a new program administrator, or we don't know who to contact, that could also cause a lapse in your provider approval. So this is also something that you sign, the last page, your acknowledge and agreement form. This is actually in there. So it is important that we get that information. And you can send an email to CEPA@camft.org. Both Tim and I have access to that email, or me directly at mmuro@camft.org. Here's our CEPA resources page that I've been talking about till I'm blue in the face here. So sorry about that. But on the CAMFT website, you would go to camft.org/CE providers/CE provider resources. So all of the items that we've discussed and many more are on this page. We have the CEPA manual, which is always nice to download while you're doing your application as well. We even have how to write or drafting tips on how to write a co-sponsoring agreement. We have the course content lines, just everything here at your fingertips. Next, if you have any questions about these topics or anything, we really pride ourselves on trying to be always accessible for our providers. You mean a great deal to us, and we just need you to know that and recognize that, and we will get back to you as soon as we can. Again, I'm Mary Beth Muro, the program coordinator, and there is my contact information. And you can also reach out to Tim McMullen, who is our fearless program manager. And a big thank you to our providers. What you offer the community and your fellow colleagues is so important and so valuable. And again, I am so honored to be a part of this program and working with such amazing people. I have a dream job working with people like you. So I feel very, very grateful. And we're always here for you.